All right, MA Economics students, let's get straight into it. With exams right around the corner, this explainer is your high-yield masterclass on Unit 1 of the Indian economy. Think of this as your ultimate revision toolkit. We are going to map out the entire conceptual and chronological story of India's economic history. We'll start from the deep structural constraints at independence and trace the path all the way to the 1991 liberalization. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to make this complex history incredibly easy to recall when you're sitting in the exam hall.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll tackle constraints at independence, the Nehru-Mahalanobis strategy, political economy and friction, crises and policy evolution, the 1991 reforms, and we'll wrap up with a rapid exam revision toolkit.
Section 1. Constraints at Independence. To really understand why India chose its specific economic path, you have to picture the severe structural burdens inherited in the 1950s. Imagine inheriting an economy with virtually no heavy industry, incredibly low savings, hovering around just 5 to 10% of GDP, and a crippling reliance on importing basic machinery. The private sector simply did not have the capital to fix a problem of this magnitude. So a massive, state-led big push wasn't just some ideological preference. It was an absolute macroeconomic necessity to get things moving.
Section 2. The Nehru-Mahalanobis strategy.
The core logic planners used to break these constraints is actually fascinating. Economist Sukhomoy Chakravarti explained it beautifully using the phrase, "machines to make machines." Indian planners realized that if they didn't build a domestic capital goods sector right away, things like steel plants and heavy engineering, the country would be permanently trapped in a cycle of importing machinery from abroad. The ultimate goal here was long-term, self-reliant industrialization.
Now, a great exam question is why India rejected the labor-intensive textile-first path. Why not start with clothes instead of steel? First, economist Deepak Nair highlights export pessimism. Planners honestly didn't believe primary goods or textiles would find strong, reliable buyers in the global market. Second, there was a real political reluctance to hand over massive power to established regional textile elites. And finally, there was the legacy of the independence movement, which strongly preferred traditional, small-scale village production over massive, modern textile mills.
So where exactly did agriculture fit into this grand, heavy industry vision? Well, it was treated as a bargain sector. Planners were incredibly optimistic. They figured they could extract cheap food and surplus labor to feed the new industrial hubs without actually having to pour heavy capital into farming. They banked on basic extension services and sweeping institutional changes, doing the heavy lifting instead.
Section 3. Political economy and friction.
But of course, a model on paper eventually has to survive the real world. This brings us to the political economy friction. Scholars like Prabhat Patnaik and Terence J. Byers point out exactly where the model hit a wall. Planners expected a fiercely strong state that could tax the wealthy and force land reforms. The reality? The state was relatively weak against deeply entrenched rural elites, a point Byers heavily emphasizes. And large business houses? They naturally chased higher profits, instead of dutifully following the government's strict licensing priorities.
If you want a psychological hook to instantly recall this friction during your exam, use the LTPE formula. Why did the model falter? L. Land reforms remained weak. T. Taxation of the rich was severely limited. P. Private firms followed profits, actively bypassing the license raj. And E. Employment received way too little attention simply because heavy industry is inherently capital-intensive, not labor-intensive.
Section 4. Crises and policy evolution.
All these structural frictions eventually bubbled over into massive economic crises. The heavy industry dream hit a brutal reality check in the mid-1960s. We are talking severe droughts, wars, and a catastrophic foreign exchange crisis. It was so bad it forced a 3-year planned holiday where public investment was drastically slashed. This period completely shattered the heavy industry tunnel vision and forced a necessary pivot toward agriculture and poverty alleviation as we moved into the 1970s.
The most direct response to that mid-60s food crisis was the Green Revolution. But pay close attention to how Sukhomoy Chakravarti evaluates it. Yes, it was an undeniable technical success. High-yielding seeds and fertilizers absolutely broke agricultural stagnation. However, Chakravarti warns it was an institutional failure. Because the much-needed land reforms were bypassed, the new tech overwhelmingly benefited rich farmers who already had easy access to credit and irrigation. This ended up severely worsening rural inequality.
Section 5. 1991 Reforms and Neoliberalism.
Moving into the 1980s, debt-financed growth was papering over massive cracks. An absolutely crucial argument for your essays is that 1991 was not a sudden, out-of-the-blue shock. It was a brewing macroeconomic crisis. The state was running huge fiscal deficits, the current account deficit was swelling as imports wildly outpaced exports, and the external debt burden was reaching a breaking point. The system was fundamentally unbalanced.
When you need to summarize the 1991 structural adjustments, anchor your answer with the CRISS mnemonic. Costly debt triggered it. The Rao Manmohan political leadership drove it. They implemented industrial delicensing. They pushed through macro stabilization via devaluation. They launched import liberalization. All of this culminating in a massive shift toward a market-oriented system.
Now, a really common misconception is assuming the state just vanished after 1991. You definitely want to bring in the arguments of Prabhat Patnaik and R. Nagaraj here. They argue the state didn't retreat at all, it just reoriented. India transitioned from national capitalism to global capitalism. Instead of protecting domestic industry and strictly controlling imports, the state formed a new alliance. It shifted its role to facilitate global capital, encourage foreign direct investment, and support corporate elites, all under the banner of market efficiency.
Section 6. Rapid Exam Revision Toolkit.
All right, let's equip you for the exam room. Here are your high-yield academic keywords. Liberally sprinkle these into your answers to instantly signal to the examiner that you know your stuff. Connect export pessimism directly to Deepak Nayar. Ascribe the bargain sector to the agricultural neglect highlighted by Chakravarti, and use machines to make machines when unpacking the Mahalanobis strategy. Getting these specific phrases onto the page is a game changer.
Before you start writing your 15-mark essays, jot these acronyms down in the margins to outline your thoughts. BASE is perfect for evaluating the Nehru Mahalanobis Foundation. Machine organizes the logic of heavy industrialization, and Build, Drift, Reform, Rebalance gives you the perfect chronological arc of Indian planning from 1951 right through to the post-1991 era.
Here is the ultimate test. If you can confidently tackle these 5 big questions using the scholars and frameworks we've just discussed, you are completely prepared for Unit 1. Practice verbally answering these, ensuring you have a balanced, critical evaluation ready to fire off for each one.
I'm going to leave you with this provocative question, inspired by the writings of R. Nagaraj. As you wrap up your revision, think critically about where India goes from here. The state might have stepped back from directly running factories, but maybe a reimagined developmental state is exactly what we need to bridge today's massive infrastructure and employment gaps. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep reviewing those mnemonics, and the absolute best of luck on your exam.